I got, and I think it's pretty interesting, an educated, healthy, and confident nation is harder to govern. So let's change the word govern to manipulate, okay? So do you think this guy is British, by the way, and that's what he meant when he said that? Do you think that's true?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Is our country healthy or unhealthy?
Unhealthy.
Basically, pretty unhealthy. As far as overall, is our country educated about or uneducated? What would you say?
Uneducated.
Okay, why do you say that, Mike?
Until you run into Dr. Paul, you don't know anything.
Well, I didn't expect that answer.
Well, we're just not being told. It's just everybody's just clueless. We've been like the frog in the pot of water, and we boil and realize it's too late. We should have been doing this sort of thing years ago.
Yeah.
Until now.
I was going to say our country's definitely not very educated on health. But I mean, if you just went out and just basically randomly asked people, what are the 3 branches of government and what do they do? I don't think I think half the people couldn't even give us an answer.
They Google it.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. And so at least, I'm not here to give you a civics lesson, that's for sure, but I want to at least educate you on as much as I know about how the body works and how you can stay healthy and how you don't have to get sick. So today we're going to be talking about cancer. And so how many of you believe cancer is a problem?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I know, it's a really dumb question, right? How many of you have known people or had relatives die of cancer? I mean, I've had, an aunt and an uncle die of cancer for sure, and friends for sure. So it's a big issue. How many of you believe that our traditional healthcare system is really trying to? Hey, Carmen.
Yeah.
Could you turn up the air conditioning?
That's what I'm going to do.
Okay. Our traditional healthcare system is really trying to educate people on how not to get cancer. So you think they are?
Well, that last part that you just said, I might have raised my hand too soon. Because I think they're trying to find a cure of cancer, but they've been doing this for 50 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean Nixon.
And it's not easy to find the cure for cancer.
Yeah, and we're going to find out why.
Yeah,
why
let's
it's so
get to the
difficult.
source of it.
Yeah, we're going to find out why. So, cancer is a modern disease. The first report of cancer in the scientific literature was in 1761. They had nasal cancer in snuff users. And then in 1775, these chimney sweeps were getting scrotal cancer, which that would be pretty nasty.
Wow.
I would think.
Yeah.
That's pretty nasty issue. The University of Manchester study indicates that cancer-causing factors exist only in our modern industrialized societies. So in ancient times, when they unearthed these sarcophagus and these mummies, they haven't found a lot of it. They haven't found that they had cancer, and it seems to be, down to pollution, diet, and lifestyle. So Weston Price, and are you familiar with the Weston Price Foundation in here? He went all over the world and studied indigenous people who had long, healthy lives. And he found out that, they all ate the food that was, that they grew, and they didn't eat processed food. They ate the food that their ancestors had eaten and that people in the area grew. And so he wrote a pretty extensive book called, I can't remember the name of it, but he said instead of dying, they contract, instead of dying because they contract disease, individual develop disease because they are dying. Okay, I think there's a lot of truth in that. People, you know, in our culture, people, it's almost like they reach the peak of health when they're 35 or 40, and then they just start going downhill. That's not the way it should be. You know, if you look at some of the really healthy people, like Jack LaLanne, you know, he was healthy until he was 96, and then he went downhill real fast and died. Andreas Segovia, you know, that great guitarist, he gave his last guitar recital at 95. And it was like 3 or 4 months later, maybe 6 months later after that, that he died. Now, one of the things that Segovia was known for at the very end of his life when he was doing his guitar recitals, is he'd be in the middle of a song and he'd forget the rest of the song. You know, that'd be pretty embarrassing if you're on stage, you know. So anyway, everything wasn't always perfect with him. So cancer cells grow in a toxic environment. You know, when blood is toxic and congested, you know, your lymphatics are blocked, your immune system doesn't work, and you don't get enough oxygen. Well, by the way, what's one of the best ways to oxygenate your body? Exercise. That's right. Mm-hmm. Exercise. Okay. So this year, over 600,000 people will die from cancer. 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will be diagnosed in their lifetimes. And despite embellished announcements from all the people that say we're doing better with cancer, the death rate from cancer is approximately the same as it was in the 50s. I think now, I put this slide in here several years ago. I think we're doing a little bit better with cancer now than what we were with treatment, but it's still not great. Cancer receives more funding from the NIH than in any other disease. Every pharmaceutical company is looking into it because it's enormously profitable to treat people for cancer. You know, at one time, cancer was considered a genetic disease, and we're going to see tonight how it's not really that. But the success rate of drugs to target that was pretty awful. It was abysmal. And more than 700 drugs have been developed. Only one has made any meaningful difference in the lives of cancer patients. And that's only in a certain type of leukemia. And you know, there are some cancer patients that they get better with chemotherapy. And I'm not saying that there aren't. But there's an Australian journal that printed an article. And this article's pretty old, so it's about 15 to 18 years ago. And what they said in this article was that chemotherapy drugs are really only responsible for about 2 to 5% of a patient's recovery. Which isn't very good, I don't think. So where's the other, like 95% come from? Where do you think that comes from?
Would it be diet?
Could be, like changes, lifestyle changes. You know, I got cancer, I have to change my life now.
Yeah.
What else could it be? Maybe it's, you know, they get extra attention paid to them. Maybe that helps them, you know. And that 2 to 5%, I don't know if that's still accurate or not, because that's an old article, like I said, it's about 18 years ago. But I thought it was pretty interesting. Eric Topol is a very well-known cardiologist, and he's the editor of Medscape, which is, Medscape is an online sort of, you can look on that, and there's all kinds of interesting articles in there on medical care and health care. And I used to use Medscape articles quite a bit when I did my radio show because he had some good stuff on there. But here's what he said. Chemotherapy is just medieval. It's such a blunt instrument. We're going to look back on it like we do the Dark Ages. It's pretty interesting for a guy at the Scripps Institute to say that. If you look at the complexity of the genetic theory of cancer, and this is why this doesn't work. So you can sequence genes, but genetic mutations in the DNA vary a lot from individual to individual. They can vary widely in just different parts of the tumor. So if you have a tumor and you have a different genetic variations in that tumor, what do you target? You know? And so the same cancers in different people are radically different in their mutation. There's no pattern to it. This is why those drugs for gene therapy don't work very well with cancer. So most targeted drugs might give cancer patients a few more months. Some offer no survival benefit at all and can cost more than $100,000 for a course of treatment. When it comes to cancer drugs, there's really not a relationship between price and value, and I think we're seeing that in other examples of pharmaceuticals as well. Pharmaceutical companies have not always been really honest regarding the claims they make. In 2016, Roche and OSI Pharmaceuticals were fined $67 million to settle claims that they misled doctors by inflating survival data, their cancer drug Tarceva. And that was, if you want to look that up, that was in British Medical Journal in June 16th of 2016. British Medical Journal, what I found, has been a pretty honest journal when it comes to things like this. They tend to tell the truth, like a little bit more than, let's say, JAMA. In October 2017, and this is an article I covered extensively on my radio show that I was doing back then, there was an expose in the British Medical Journal, and the expose was on cancer drugs. They were just covering, and they said that over 50% of the cancer drugs approved between these 4 years, were completely worthless. Despite that fact, they were used. They continue to be used, and they were expensive, very expensive. So let's get into the history of cancer a little bit. Now, do you know who, and if you were at my last talk, you'll know the answer to this because I did this as a teaser. Who was the guy that was one of the first big leaders to push for a diet cancer connection, a diet cancer cure?
Gosh.
Remember what I said?
I don't know, was his name Christian or something? No?
You're going to be shocked when I tell you if you don't remember. It's Adolf Hitler.
Oh, yeah.
Adolf Hitler. He was the first person who pushed hard for that. His mother died of cancer. And Otto Warburg discovered that how cancer cells utilize energy. Now, you have to understand Warburg. He was the Albert Einstein of physiology back in the 1930s. And Albert Einstein was actually a good friend of his, and they corresponded. And if you know anything about Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his family also produced a lot of really high-level German scientists who were also friends with Albert Einstein and had some correspondence with Otto Warburg. So this guy is big. He's a big deal. He won a couple of Nobel Prizes. And he discovered that cancer cells ferment sugar for energy. That's what they use. They cannot go through the normal processes of extracting energy, so they ferment sugar. Does that give you a little bit of a clue as to a diet cancer connection? Yeah. And so Warburg's really interesting. I have a book about him in the back that I read, and he was Jewish and he was a homosexual, but he was so brilliant that Adolf Hitler left him alone. And when the Nazi goon squads would come into his lab, he just chased them out. I mean, he just had so much authority on what he was doing and with so much confidence, he'd get rid of them. And they didn't bother him. They didn't put him in a concentration camp because Hitler knew his brilliance and knew that if anybody could find a diet cancer connection Warburg could do it. So this is Pete Peterson, and he was a researcher at Johns Hopkins University, and he continued Warburg's work when everybody else was looking for the genetic cancer, the genetic mutation theory. Pete Peterson continued Warburg's work, and now Warburg's work is really coming into its own, into fashion again, because the genetic theory of cancer just isn't working out very well. By the way, Peterson was mentored by a guy by the name of Albert Leninger, and Leninger knew Warburg. Has anybody ever heard the name Albert Leninger? Okay, you never heard of him?
No.
You never heard his name? I'm surprised.
No. Yeah.
Because he wrote, when I was in college, Albert Leninger wrote the seminal textbook on biochemistry. Leninger's biochemistry was like the textbook that was used at our college. It was used in medical schools. It was the textbook. Well, Leninger knew Warburg, and he mentored Pete Peterson. And Peterson was from Johns Hopkins. Now, here's something really interesting. Peterson discovered some really important aspects of cancer metabolism. Number one is cancer cells have damaged mitochondria, and far fewer of them. So mitochondria in the body produce energy. And one of the ways to get sick is to damage your mitochondria. And we'll talk about what does that here in a few minutes. He also found an abnormal enzyme driving the process called hexokinase 2. And there was a young Korean postdoctoral student, a female, by the name of Young-hee Ko, and she discovered a chemical that you can buy like anywhere. I mean, any chemistry supply store, 3-bromopyruvate, seemed to stop cancer without damaging any of the surrounding tissue. And she found out that 3BP, 3-bromopyruvate, would kill cancer without damaging any of the surrounding tissue. Now, she worked with some doctors. She was a PhD, so she wasn't a medical doctor, but she worked with some physicians in Europe, and they were injecting 3-bromopyruvate right into the tumor. They were finding out it would kill the tumor, and it wouldn't affect any of the other cells. This is pretty interesting because, you know, chemotherapy is much different than that. And so she's in the process of trying to start her own pharmaceutical company using 3-bromopyruvate. And she, you know, her efforts has been stymied by professional jealousy and greed and all kinds of things. People tried to steal her research, and you know, she's pretty tight-lipped about it. So I don't know how that's coming. I heard, you know, a few years ago that she was developing this company, and I don't know how that's going. But 3-bromopyruvate is a really inexpensive chemical. You know, we're not talking about, you know, $100,000 course of therapy. We're talking about something that's really inexpensive, but it has to be done right. You can't just go and start taking 3-bromopyruvate tablets and expect, you know, to get well. The doctors she was working with were injecting it right into the tumor, and they were doing it at a very specific stage. So, but they had really, really good results from that.
Question.
Yeah.
What is a PET scan? What does PET stand for?
A positron electro something.
Okay.
PET measures if you do it like a PET scan of the brain, it's not like an MRI that measures structure.
All right.
It measures metabolism. It shows what's happening with the brain's metabolism.
Okay, fine. Okay.
Do you have a question, Mike? Oh, okay.
Where does she live?
Baltimore. Johns Hopkins University is in Baltimore. That's where she was working.
Okay.
She was working under Pete Peterson at the time in his lab, and they were trying to figure out a way to get cancer to stop growing. And anyway, it's a really interesting story, and that whole story is in a book that I read called Tripping Over the Truth, which is a really good book. It's written by a guy by the name of Travis Christofferson. Many and Thomas Seyfried is another very well-known cancer researcher. He wrote a big, thick textbook on the metabolism of how cancer is a metabolic disease, which is really different than the way of looking at it as a genetic disease. And they all found that dysfunctional mitochondria is a primary metabolic mechanism which causes cancer. And each of our cells contains thousands of mitochondria, and when the mitochondria, the cells, start functioning properly, when they stop working right or they get poisoned, that's when people get chronic fatigue, they get tired all the time, and disease and things can set in. So there's a growing appreciation among cancer scientists that mitochondria play a critical role in the transformation into cancer. Mitochondria in cancer cells consume blood sugar 50 times faster than normal cells.
So is that why people lose weight when they have cancer? I think that's one of the signs of cancer.
I think
rapid weight loss.
I think one of the things is that cancer cells start consuming their bodies.
Oh.
And that's one of the reasons for
Okay,
weight
right.
loss. But not everybody loses weight when they get
Okay, I see.
cancer.
Okay.
Because I've had patients, and one patient that I'll talk about him a little bit more, but he didn't lose a lot of weight, and he had pretty severe cancer and ended up dying from it.
Wow. Okay. Fine.
So this quote here is from a book called The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. Signals from distressed mitochondria and the excess of nutrients, primarily sugar, in the cell can lead to an overload of reactive oxygen species, which alters genetic expression, and the DNA become more vulnerable to mutations. So what this is saying is that the genetic variations or the DNA variations in cancer is really a symptom of mitochondrial dysfunction, which I think is pretty interesting. Okay, what did I do here? Let's see. Okay. So there's an intimate relationship between sugar consumption, elevated insulin levels, and mitochondrial dysfunction in cancer. So, if you want to not get cancer, you really need to cut back on your sugar consumption. Now, here's an article that I went over in my 10 Minutes of Truth several weeks ago. So, if you look at somebody's insulin levels, which I do on all my blood tests, insulin is really, really important marker for disease. Breast cancer, with elevated insulin levels, you have 2 to 3 times the increase of getting breast cancer. Colon cancer, it's 17 to 43% increase with increased insulin levels. Pancreas cancer goes up. Uterus cancer, cancer of the uterus, 10 to 45-fold, depending on how high the insulin levels are. Kidney, brain, esophagus cancer, prostate, 2.5 to 5.6 times increased with increased levels of insulin. So insulin is a very, very important marker for the possible future development of cancer. So you want your insulin levels to be really low. So diet is extremely important in managing. Cancer cells demand an enormous amount of glucose. If you eliminate all simple carbohydrate from your diet, you starve cancer cells. This diet is known as a restrictive ketogenic diet. It's high in fat, non-starchy carbs, and moderate in protein. If you're a cancer patient and you fast regularly, just do a water fast regularly, that's really helped people recover from cancer because you're literally starving the cancer cells because they live off of sugar. Okay, Thomas Graeber, a professor of molecular and medical pharmacology, demonstrated that glucose starvation activates metabolic and signaling amplification loop that leads to cancer cell death. So that was in the Journal of Molecular Systems Biology, June of 2012. Does anybody ever hear of this in the news or anything? You never hear about it, okay? You should, because it's in the literature. I mean, it's in the medical literature.
Okay.
So precisely how much sugar is too much may be different for each person depending on your age, your exercise habits, and your capacity to store fat safely. But the path from refined sugar added to our diets to insulin resistance and from insulin resistance to cancer is now well understood and based on widely accepted science. That's a great book, the book Ravenous. That's where I got some of the information for this talk. And he goes through the entire history of the diet-cancer connection and talks a lot about Otto Warburg in there. Dr. Christine Horner, she talked about a study conducted at Harvard Medical School in 2004, so 20 years ago, found that women whose teenagers who ate high glycemic foods and increased their blood glucose levels had a higher incidence of breast cancer later in life. So if you see these teenagers drinking all this pop and eating all this junk food, basically they're setting themselves up for breast cancer. These women are setting themselves up for breast cancer later in life.
Okay, what is glycemic? What is glycemic?
Glycemic index is the ability to raise your blood sugar. So glycemic refers to sugar.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So high glycemic foods would be like candy bars, donuts,
Right.
things
Okay,
like that.
I see.
You know, yeah.
Okay.
Anything they sell at Dunkin' Donuts, basically. So, what other things damage mitochondria? Okay, this is something you need to know. Aspirin and Tylenol, angina medications, pain and anti-inflammatory medications, cholesterol medications. That's why I would never take a statin drug for that and a lot of other reasons. Okay. Antidepressants, antibiotics, chemotherapy meds, anxiety medications, nearly all industrial chemicals, including plasticizers, which we're all exposed to. You know, so we know we all have plastics in our body, and we know that. So the best thing is then to not put all kinds of other stuff in your body that add to that. So pesticides and insecticides, toxic metals, solvents. So ways to heal and enhance mitochondrial function. So intermittent fasting. Anybody in here do that? Intermittent fast? Yeah, you guys do? I do regularly, yeah. Getting rid of refined carbs like soda, white bread, and pastries. Eating quality protein like grass-fed beef, pasture eggs, you know, bison is really good. Eating food sources of omega-3 and alpha-lipoic acid like Brussels sprouts and carrots and beets are high in alpha-lipoic acid, which is very, very powerful antioxidant. Antioxidant-rich foods, like dark chocolate, is pretty good as long as it's low sugar. Dark chocolate. All the women in here ought to be pretty happy about that. Exercise regularly. Infrared saunas are good. Now I don't have one, but they are good. Reducing stress and getting enough sleep. So here's some nutrients that really help mitochondria. Magnesium, L-carnitine, D-ribose. I carry that here in the office. Cataplex B, B vitamins. alpha lipoic acid, CoQ10, and omega-3 fatty acids. So melatonin is a very, very powerful anti-cancer nutrient. This is a journal article that I came across in 2021. Key points from this article: mitochondria produce melatonin. It's a very powerful antioxidant, and it helps protect the mitochondria from oxidation and damage. Loss of ability to produce melatonin leads to cellular disease. When cells exhibit the Warburg effect, melatonin production is shut down. So the Warburg effect is cells using sugar to produce energy. So there's a blood test. Okay. So I don't take melatonin personally, but it is not a bad strategy for cancer prevention. So mitochondrial dysregulation is linked to a lot of health conditions: cancer, psychological illness, inflammation, fibrosis, Alzheimer's. It's connected with traumatic brain injury and autoimmunity. So you can take it, and it inhibits cell proliferation, exogenously administered, meaning you can take it orally. And melatonin is quite powerful. At least that's what the research is showing. Here's some more melatonin information. Here's Stephen Gundry. How many of you have heard of him? Yeah. He wrote The Plant Paradox and some other, yeah. Here's a quote from him. Melatonin has the power to prevent and reverse cancer through uncoupling mechanisms, enhancing mitochondrial function in the process. I am now prescribing what many would consider ultra-high doses of melatonin, up to 100 milligrams a day in divided doses, to some of my patients diagnosed with dementia or cancer to help them get their mitochondrial function back online. This includes 44 milligrams daily to his beloved Labradoodle diagnosed with bladder cancer. 2 weeks after starting her supplement, she started peeing like a racehorse. She hasn't had a problem since. That's an interesting quote. So what does the medical literature say about diet in cancer? Cancer patients usually have significant malnutrition and have nutrition deficits before diagnosis. So that, do the nutritional deficits contribute to the cancer? Probably. Okay. Many cancer patients develop tumor-associated malnutrition, characterized by an insufficient supply of macro and micronutrients. So this just talks about all the nutrients and the things that affect nutrition, like chemotherapy really can affect patients' food selection, nutrient absorption, and utilization. Okay, this is in Oncology Reports in 2010. British Medical Journal. The risk of cancer, especially breast cancer, is associated with ultra-processed foods. So if you increase by 10% the ultra-processed foods you're eating in your diet, it translates to a 12% increase overall risk in cancer, an 11% increase in breast cancer. So what are ultra-processed foods? Here they are. So the one that I think of right off is sugared breakfast cereal. I mean, that's a really ultra-processed food, but basically most of the things you find in packages in the grocery store. So here's some right here.
But I like cereal.
Well, eat all you want. You can have mine too, Yeah, my share as well. So mushrooms are really powerful anti-cancer substances. Here's some research on mushrooms. And this product, Glycan Renew, is one of the mushroom products I carry. So, but eating mushrooms is really good too. You don't have to even buy a product, you can just eat them. So these are all the things they found out about mushrooms, okay? Anti-diabetic, they lower cholesterol, anti-tumor, anti-cancer, they modulate the immune system. So here's a strategy for the natural management of cancer. Fasting, ketogenic diet, exercise, organic vegetable juice, all the things we talked about. Alkaline water, which we have in there. Chiropractic care to optimize nerve flow and function. Taking mushroom compounds, therapeutic doses of melatonin. Now, here's some laboratory tests, which I use a lot. Now, I'm not a cancer doctor. I don't treat cancer. If I suspect somebody has it, I'll tell them and say, hey, you need to maybe go get this checked out. But if somebody comes into me and they have a really high insulin level, I'll tell them, you need to get that down because that can lead to cancer, and there's good evidence for that. So insulin and glucose, these three are sugar markers, very, very good for that. Hair mineral analysis is good for toxic metals. Great Plains Tox Screen, which I don't know if they're able to do that anymore, determines exposure to a wide variety of industrial and agricultural chemicals. Organic acid testing can be really good to look at functional analysis of the body. This is a urine test. These two tests are both urine tests. So another test that I use is the LDH it's a very common lab test, lactate dehydrogenase. Lactate dehydrogenase goes up when the body is fermenting sugar into lactic acid, which is the Warburg effect. So if I get somebody with a real high level of LDH, that person needs to really change their diet. And there's a particular product that I use to help lower that. But LDH I've heard it called the poor man's cancer marker, because when it's high, it's not good. It means the body's fermenting sugar for energy, and so we want to get that down. But I'm constantly warning people about high insulin levels. So how do you get insulin down? Anybody?
Lower your carbs.
Yeah. Yes, stop eating sugar and carbs would be one. How else?
Exercise.
Exercise, that's right. So those are the two biggies. And the third one would be taking specific nutrients. Gymnema is good, chromium's good. I have a product called Glucose Sugar Balance, which I really like a lot, which has everything in it that I like for lowering blood sugar. But keeping your insulin levels low is really, really important. And I sometimes wonder if you have low enough, if your insulin levels are low, if you can even get cancer, or how probable it is to get it, because insulin is such a cell growth stimulator that when it's high, it stimulates the growth of cells, and when it's low, it really suppresses that. So,
Dr. Paul, can
Yeah.
you get it too low?
if you had an insulin of 1, that's probably too low, but I've never seen any, the lowest I've ever seen it is 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say to that person, they're doing some things right.
Mm-hmm.
Mine, last time I checked mine, it was 4.4, which I'm pretty happy with that. It should be below 5.
Mm-hmm.
You should have an insulin level below 5. So, insulin and LDH are 2 pretty important markers that I look at when I do a blood test. And if those are high, that person needs to change some things.
Is there a self-test for that, or do you have to go to the doctor and have a blood panel
For insulin,
for insulin?
For A1C,
I
the doctor.
I don't know how you would self-test for it. And it's a
Right. you
It's a
gotta go to
blood
the doctor.
test. There aren't any home tests that I know of for it.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, maybe there are, but I haven't heard of any right off. And you know, what the interesting thing is, it's not a super common test that I see when people bring their lab work to me. Occasionally I see somebody that's bringing in insulin tests, but not very often. And I think it's a really, really important test, especially in this day and age. So that's what I do. I do these 3 tests on all my comprehensive blood panels, plus LDH, plus a lot of other things. So the question is who do you know that needs to know about this stuff? You know, because you let them know that we're gonna post this. If you have people that that may be developing, you know, some metabolic problems, we might want to do some blood work on them and do some things like insulin, LDH, vitamin D, things that can really tell, you know, a little bit about, or a lot about, what's going on with their metabolism, their mitochondria. Because that's the, you know, I mean, most of the time, if you talk to your physician about mitochondrial function, I mean, they're gonna get a glazed look over their eyes. It's not something that they know that much about or really think about very much. But that's really, really important if you look at the research on cancer. So we can look at a lot of that stuff here and help people with it and help them lower those markers so they can be healthy and live healthier lives. So, any questions? Yes.
Well, and a thought came to me, and that is there are fast-growing cancers and slow ones, or there are just tumors that can be in your brain, and if they don't interfere with anything, doctors won't bother to operate. But if they do interfere, they're going to take them out. But is there anything in the research on the difference between these two, a fast-growing?
Slow and fast-growing?
Yeah, no.
There probably is, Conrad, but I don't have it.
Okay, fine.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
fine.
haven't
Okay.
read about it.
Okay.
I mean, you know, there's slow-growing prostate cancers
Mhm.
that, you know, that,
Yeah.
and I would say this,
Mhm.
if you have something like that, that's a good reason to really watch your diet,
Okay.
you know, but
Mhm.
I don't have any information on it. But you're right, there's some slow-growing and some.
Okay, fine.
But if you got cancer and you're you know, you got a biopsy that shows that's probably been in there for 10 years, maybe longer, 10 or 15 years. Because cancer doesn't happen overnight. You don't catch it like a cold, you know.
Right.
So it takes time for those cells to
Okay.
change and mutate.
Is there a blood test that will indicate cancer?
Oh yeah, there's lots of them.
Oh, okay.
Oh, there's lots of blood tests like that.
Okay.
And they're getting better.
Okay.
Yeah, they're getting better. Yeah.
What do you suggest for fasting? You said that do you do it on a daily basis, or do you do it on a weekly basis? Or what do you suggest?
I do both. So what I do for fasting is I usually, like the last food that I'll have, I usually have like 7 o'clock maybe, sometimes sooner than that, and then I won't eat till maybe between 11 and 1 the next day. I never eat breakfast. And then on Thursdays, I eat lunch, and I don't eat again till Friday night, till Friday at 5. So I do that pretty regularly.
But you drink fluids.
Yeah, I drink
Yeah.
fluids, right,
Coffee,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, I drink fluids, but I don't eat anything. So I do that pretty routinely. I didn't when I was on vacation, but I was at my mother's. I couldn't do it then, so. But I do it when I'm here. Okay.
Sure.
And I also exercise during that time, so I don't eat Thursday night, eat Thursday noon, that's the only meal I eat that day. And so Friday morning I do some pretty heavy exercise because I want my body to burn fat. I'm training it to burn fat. And then I eat at 5 on Fridays. So I do that pretty regularly.
Okay.
And some Saturdays I don't eat till 3, 2:33. I don't eat anything till then. So it depends on the day, but I intermittent fast regularly.
Slides?
Yeah, you want me to get them to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Anybody else want the slides? Yeah, just give her the email address and I'll get them to you. Yeah.
I think my brother Ron German, I don't have a computer, so, but I think Ron will have a copy of your talk today on his computer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'll
good.
work. Okay.
All right. So, yes.
Are there alternatives to sugar, like honey or something that's reasonable, or is that?
I mean, you know, a lot of people are using monk fruit, they're using stevia. I think those are a lot better than sugar.
Okay.
You know, I mean, honey is, I look at honey as more medicinal. Like, you know, like if you got a cough or a cold or a sore throat, you know, lemon juice and honey. I mean, we use a little bit of honey at our house, and I like it. And we have patients who actually keep bees, like your brother, you know, and he produces really good honey. We bought some from him, and so, but we don't use a lot of it. We use some.
Okay.
And we also use coconut sugar, which is much higher in nutrition than normal sugar. It's a dark brown, has a lot of minerals in it, and it's not nearly as sweet.
Is it low glycemic?
Yeah, it's pretty low glycemic. Yeah, and so we use that, but we don't use a lot of sugar for stuff at our house. We just don't. We cook some, but we don't eat white sugar in the house. I can tell you that. You know, so we have some brown sugar, which we don't use very much. I use it for making kombucha tea, which the tea ferments it all out, and so there's really no sugar left in there. So we don't use a lot of sugar. So, any other questions? Yes, Terry.
I had a cousin that had brain cancer between the ages of 6 and 8. He had surgery. He still died, but why would a child that young get brain cancer? We could never figure it out. He's like the only one in the family.